interesting how Singapore is the winner out of this.
I was thinking that.
Like, as an authoritarian government, but that one that understood how to let the financial system alone.
Right. Well, it's. I think that large corporations kind of tend towards working under authoritarianism. There's a certain appeal to it, right? Which is that you can get in if you have relationships with the right people, and it seems stable. And I don't think that's right, but nonetheless, there seems to be a big attraction. Like, Americans, we have American values, freedom, democracy, and so on. But when it comes to investments overseas, like, we actually don't care that much. And like, we don't care if we get our oil from Saudi Arabia. We don't care if we get it from
or Venezuela.
I don't want to leave them out.
I think the oil's not as good from Venezuela.
That's actually true. I mean, the quality, but I mean it's and where's manufacturing moving to, right? I remember Trump was like, bring it back to America, but most of the manufacturing that left China didn't come back to America. It was only less than 10% of it. A lot of it was going to places like Vietnam, authoritarian country, Malaysia.
Well,
right?
Don't worry. In the next 10 or 20 years after the great global financial collapse, we'll all be trading Trump NFTs, and that'll be the only source of economic activity.
I do have to say that the whole thing this is why the yuan will never be a reserve currency. Like what you were talking about earlier, like the kind of environment you need to do stable business.
Yeah.
Like every time, because like I think there's been a bunch of panic over Saudi Arabia and China just agreed to do more oil swaps in yuan.
Right.
And so people were like, oh my God, this is like they're cutting the dollar out. This is the beginning of the end for the US dollar.
Right.
Because it was always like
the dollar's the reserve currency.
For oil, especially, right?
Sure. The petrodollar. Suddenly that sounds like the petrodollar.
But anyway, I think that's the thing that people don't understand. What happens when Saudi Arabia gets yuan? They immediately convert it into dollars because they can't do anything with their yuan. Like they can't do anything except buy stuff from China, and maybe they don't need to buy that much stuff from China. So,
well, I mean, they buy a lot from China. China's their biggest trading partner.
China's the biggest trading partner for like a lot of countries in the world.
That's true.
That's not a special thing necessarily.
But I mean, the CCP is making a huge effort to get the yuan to be a reserve currency, and they succeeded in one sense. Was like 5 years ago or something. I don't remember the year, but it was. They got, because the IMF has a basket of currencies they use that allow different countries to kind of trade in these like IMF denominated currency, and they added the yuan, the renminbi, into the basket that included dollars and euros and pounds and I think one other thing. And now it's also renminbi. So there's a lot. There's still that kind of yuan creep.
Well, I think they want certain things about having a reserve currency. Like if they could become a globally accepted currency, then they could break away from the dollar, and then U.S. sanctions, for example, couldn't hurt them.
Right.
The way that U.S. sanctions hurt Russia, right, after the Ukraine war. But to become a reserve currency, they have to let go of an amount of control that they do not want to. They cannot.
They're pegging to the dollar, which they claim they don't do anymore, but they do.
They're manipulating their currency, and they need to manipulate their currency because that is how they control their economy.
Right. It's a communist state-planned economy.
Yeah, and they cannot like stabilize their economy without being able to manipulate the yuan. So they cannot let go of that, so they will never be able to let it float freely in the market. And then they will never be able to let it become a reserve currency, because that's what you need, the ability to buy and sell yuan freely. Like if you hold yuan, you need to do it because you think it's stable. And,
Well, are you assuming that the rest of the world will care about all those important points?
Well, it's in their own self-interest. This is not like a thing that's like, people don't care about human rights in Saudi Arabia or something.
Yeah.
This is a thing that like
it actually affects them.
Yes.
Oh God.
You know what I mean? Like it's
not like
affects,
human rights. It doesn't affect.
But I mean, you can make the
Yeah.
argument that human rights does affect this, and a lot of these corporations and countries are just being really short-sighted
That's true.
about it. But they understand very much how this type of monetary policy like directly affects their own countries.
Right. I mean, it's kind of like the same mentality where Ed's friend, who's sort of pro Beijing in a lot of ways, is like, I still am pro Beijing, but also I've now moved 95% of my money out of Hong Kong.
I'm pro Beijing, 5 to 7% of my assets.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there could be a lot of lip service on the surface about certain things related to the Chinese economy, but then a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not putting my money there.
I guess I just don't have your faith in people not making bad decisions. Or I have faith in people making bad decisions.
Like Ray Dalio.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I just, I see a future where, the dollar has been edged out. People become more dependent on the Yuan. Then something happens in China, the Yuan collapse. And then you'll all be really sorry for laughing at me for investing all my money in Trump NFTs.
I saw that where that was going towards the end. And I was like, wait, how is the yuan going to edge out the dollar? And then I was like, never mind.
Yeah, no, it's just like a slow motion, like train wreck coming.
Train wreck, all aboard on the Trump NFTs. This train's not.
They're not calling them NFTs though, right? They're calling them like digital.
I've heard it
trading
described
cards.
as, like they're trading cards.
Just for clarity, we are not providing investment advice on this.
I am.
show.
This is the future.
Thanks for trying to protect us, Matt, from whatever.
From being sued or something.
Maybe don't invest in that.
Yeah.
I like what you posted on Instagram where you were like, I could never have predicted this in a million years.
Yeah, like when he was like, last week, he said, big announcement coming Thursday. It was NFT trading cards. Where did that come from?
I don't know. Someone sold him on the idea. Maybe with the really cool photo, illustrations of him as a superhero.
Yeah.
Right. But remember also that he used to pitch all sorts of products back when he was regular Donald Trump.
That's true.
He had he had Trump Airlines. He had Trump steaks, the best steaks, eat them well done with ketchup. He even had Trump vodka, which is weird because he doesn't actually drink alcohol. But he had all this whole range of product sold at the Sharper Image.
Guys, are we really going to end this podcast about Hong Kong by talking about Donald Trump NFTs?
No, we're not. We're going to stop now. I just got on a tangent.
Yeah.
It's just the way that we're all still a little bit in the media. We're all a little bit addicted to talking about Donald Trump.
So Hong Kong.
Yeah. Help us get out of this, Shelley. That's why I'm looking at you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think on a serious note, I think it is probably the toughest part for Hong Kong and Hong Kongers is now, because it is the aftermath of an incredibly horrible situation. People are fleeing. They've lost their homes.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're trying to figure out how to rebuild their lives in exile and how to keep that Hong Kong alive,
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is something I've actually thought about before as somebody who really can't go back to China for the foreseeable future. How do you leave somewhere and then kind of try to keep that part of yourself or your experience? How do you keep that alive? And for Hong Kongers, how do they keep that spirit that Ed was talking about going?
And the answer is Hong Kong roast goose.
I mean, that actually is, I think, a pretty big part of it. I remember Louisa Lim talking about going to this Hong Kong. She lives in Australia, and going to this Hong Kong movie. It was kind of just like a, what do you call it, movie festival, where it was just playing a bunch of old Hong Kong movies. And then she was like, she could always tell when the Hong Kongers came in because they would kind of sit by themselves in the back of the theater and cry.
Oh.
But things like food, right? I follow this one food writer on Instagram, Fuchsia Dunlop, and she was written a lot about Chinese food because she went to Sichuan and got trained formally at the this big food academy that almost never happens with foreigners and things like that. So she was in Hong Kong and she was just like posting every day about all the food she was eating in Hong Kong, and I was just like, it's actually making me really sad to see that, because food is something that really reminds you of a place.
Yeah, it's a big part of a culture.
And actually, probably the most nostalgic Hong Kong Instagram I follow is one about cats. It's called HK Cats Daily, and they just post videos and photos of like cats around Hong Kong. In a really good way. Like they're all shop cats or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, so
okay, because you had made the segue from talking about food, so I wasn't sure where you were going.
No, like they're just like kind of like cats wandering around the street, or cats like in an herbal shop, cats in like a bodega kind of place, cats in like a different Hong Kong stores, and it was just like, oh man, that feels like Hong Kong.
It's like that movie that came out a few years ago about like Istanbul, but through the eyes of cats.
Oh, I vaguely remember that. Yeah. Well, I mean, the good thing is that culture can be preserved abroad. Like Tibetans have been pretty successful at still maintaining a identity.
Right.
It probably helps that they have the Dalai Lama, really.
That's true.
And there's also like a physical hub, right?
There is Dharamsala.
Dharamsala.
Yeah. And like maybe like either London or Canada, one of those places will become more of the center. But I mean, also like keep in mind, like we saw in these recent protests in China, that there is a lot of resentment, even though it's very much buried under the surface. I'm sure there's still a lot of resentment in Hong Kong, and that will still stay there. And
so
someday,
keep the big dream alive.
Yeah, I mean, someday the CCP will fall. And then
someday heaven will destroy the CCP.
Someday heaven.
I remember when we
get off the couch.
I remember when we started seeing all those signs in Hong Kong, and I was like, huh, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So eventually it'll happen, and then like I think a lot of these things can be rebuilt. I mean, the Communist Party has waged a lot of cultural and very much physical genocide against Tibetans, Uyghurs, Mongolians, Hong Kong. I think there's a good argument for that term being applied.
You mean cultural genocide?
Yeah, cultural genocide, yeah. And, you know, as long as that culture can be preserved somehow, even if it is abroad, it can be seeded again.
Oh, is this a rare note of hope?
Yes. Wow. Let's end on that instead of a train wreck.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely been feeling very hopeful since I made the wise investment of putting in Trump NFTs. Thanks for watching China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.